Welcome to Sola Church Online.
Worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors, he parted the raging sea. My God, he holds the victory. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is sharp in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We sing to the God who heals. We sing to the God who saves. We sing to the God who always makes a way. As he hung up on that cross, then he rose up from that grave. My God, still rolling stones away. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is sure in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by his grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by his grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is shone in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is shone in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. 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 Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. And you have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. And you have Still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. And you have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't turn it, I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't turn it, I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
This is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. If you're just checking us out, please don't feel obligated to give. But if Sola Church is your church home, or if Sola Church Online has been a blessing to you, it's super easy to make a one-time tax-deductible donation or even to schedule a recurring gift.
The easiest way is to scan the QR code on your screen, but you can always go to solachurch.life and click the tab at the top that says Give.
As always, we just want to thank you so much for your support. Your generosity is making it possible for us to do this. It's making it possible for us to do Sola Church online as well as in person here in Santa Monica. You are making a difference. We're grateful. Thank you so much.
Let's get into our time of teaching.
Light. You ever think about how many idioms we have that use the word light? Like we talk about light at the end of the tunnel. We talk about how something makes us light up.
We might describe something being brought to the light, or how something, comes to light. We might describe someone or something in a good light or in a bad light. We might talk about, how we talk about one thing in light of another, or how we're out like a light. We might describe how someone saw the light, or how someone shed light on something. Paul uses light and darkness as metaphor in the New Testament. In our text, he uses the word light 5 times in 7 verses. Let's go ahead and turn to Ephesians chapter 5. We're in this message series called Blessed. Why? Because everyone wants to be #blessed in 2023. But in this ancient letter called Ephesians, we learned that we already are. In the beginning, Paul wrote, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places in Christ." So we're going to call this one Radiant. And I want to talk first about this. We are radiant. So look with me, beginning in verse 8, it says, "For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth, finding out what is acceptable to the Lord." So we are radiant. Let's talk first about who we are as sort of a sub point. Major League Baseball is now underway. And for us in the greater Los Angeles area, it's all about the Dodgers. What's weird this year is that, so many players that were on last year's team are no longer on the roster, like Trey Turner on the Phillies, Justin Turner on the Red Sox, Cody Bellinger on the Cubs. It's so weird. It's so hard to get used to seeing them in those other uniforms. But then you think about players who are on the roster, and not all of them were always Dodgers. Freddie Freeman came from the Braves. Mookie Betts came from the Red Sox. All of these players changed teams. Well, so did we. We used to play for the darkness, and now we play for the light. Now, we didn't get released. We didn't get traded. We were free agents, and we signed with the light. Of course, after we did that, we found out that we were actually drafted by the light before time. Well, theological humor aside, this whole paragraph plays on the symbolism of both darkness and light. It takes that metaphor and just runs with it. Darkness as a metaphor for ignorance, for error, for evil. Light as a metaphor for truth, for righteousness. And so, what we've seen throughout Ephesians, and again here, is Paul telling his readers, you were that, now you're this. That, this. It's kind of funny because when you put it that way, I could think in terms of 2 Allens. I could think about who I was before I came to faith and who I am since I came to faith. 2 Allens. That's what we might call, in theological terms, justification. We come to faith, God declares us righteous. But that begins a process called sanctification, where God makes us righteous. And in that sense, there is this lifelong progression where I could think in terms of more than 2 Allens. I could think of dozens of Allens. There might be 200 Allens. In other words, I'm not the same Allen that I was before I went through my divorce. I'm not the same Allen that I was before I struggled for the first few years following my divorce. I'm not the same Allen that began clumsily getting back on my feet and moving forward again. I'm not the same Allen that I was before I moved back to California from Texas. I'm not sure I'm the same Allen that I was before COVID. I didn't have COVID, but like everyone, we all lived through that era, that season of life. I'm not sure that I'm entirely the same Allen that I was before we parachuted into Santa Monica to plant Sola Church. It's a crazy thing to think about, but it's true. I listened to a podcast this week where the speaker was talking about a season in his life, and he said, oh, that was like 13 versions of me ago. And that really resonated with me. Now, I'm talking about me, but I'm doing that so that you can think about you. Maybe you're struggling to reconcile who you were in a dark place with who you are now, or with who you're becoming. And so Paul would say to you, and I'm saying to you, you were that, now you're this. That, this. And so much of this comes back to forgiveness, to receiving forgiveness, to getting it, not just receiving it, but comprehending it. Back in Ephesians chapter 4, the last verse of the chapter, verse 32, it says, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. I love that. So God has been kind to us. He's been tender to us. He's forgiven us. And I think we should just reflect for a moment on that. For me, God has been kind to me, tender to me, forgiving to me. Can I be kind? Can I be tender? Can I be forgiving to me in that sense? Not in the sense that God is, not in the sense that other people are, but in the sense of understanding that God has been. People often want to talk to us about our past. There are people in my life who will not let me forget about those struggles after my divorce. And so part of the question becomes, can I be kind to that Alan who was in so much pain? To that Alan who'd been through so much trauma? To that Alan who went places he shouldn't have gone and dated people he shouldn't have dated? To that Alan who was in that place? Can I be tender to that Alan who found it so much easier to numb himself than to grieve losing everything in his life? Can I forgive that Alan who made bad choices, who violated his own conscience? Can I forgive that Alan? When we do that, we're owning that, but we're also making peace with that. Now, again, I'm talking about me so that you can think about you. Can you be kind to 13 years ago? Can you be kind to 7 years ago? Can you be tender to 4 years ago? Can you be forgiving to 2 years ago? Again, you're going to own that, but you're going to make peace with that. And so, as we think about who we are, Paul, again, is like, you were that, now you're this. That, this. This, you now are radiant. So who we are, what we do, well, again, in the middle of verse 8, walk as children of light. For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. Remember in our Bible study last week, in the very first verse of this 5th chapter, it says, therefore be imitators of God as dear children. We talked about how kids imitate or mimic their parents. And we said that when it comes to our relationship with God, it should be a like father, like son thing, or a like father, like daughter thing. Well, so then let's talk about the God that we're imitating, the God that we're mimicking. The ancient Hebrews were surrounded by sun worshipers. And then God reveals himself to them as the one who created light in Genesis 1, verse 3, as the one clothed with light, Psalm 104, verse 2. We get to the New Testament, and in 1 John 1, verse 5, we read straight up the 3 words, God is light. Now, if God is light and we're his children, well, then we should walk as children of light. We've encountered that walking metaphor repeatedly in Ephesians. We've learned that when used figuratively, the word means to live or pass one's life. So this is how we are to live. This this speaks to the part of this that's progressive. You know, you've got justification that happens in a moment, but you've got sanctification that happens over a lifetime. Thinking in terms of the two of us with justification, but thinking in terms of the dozens or the scores or the hundreds of us in thinking about sanctification. So again, this idea includes a description of fruit. Talks about how the fruit of the Spirit is these three things that follow. Lots of translations say the fruit of light. Really, either way, because if it is the fruit of the Spirit, then it's being used synonymously with the fruit of light and vice versa. But the idea, the picture here is of fruit ripening in the sunlight. Imagine the fruit in our lives as we are in the light. Let's just do a couple quick word studies, a few. Goodness refers to active goodness. It's been called love in action. The root word means good and benevolent, so refers to something that's profitable and useful. That word righteousness, well, really, it's easier to understand if we simply contract it, you know, from righteousness to righteous to right. You know, it describes one with a right relationship with God, but also one with a right relationship with others. It means that we have integrity in our relationships. And then truth, well, that is to say that when we walk in the light, we're the same person inside and out. We have nothing to hide, and for that reason, nothing to fear. So when we talk about this, we were that, now we're this. Well, what does this look like? This is us as a lifestyle doing all that is good and all that is right and all that is true. And that's so much of what people are actually doing in the world. You know, we watch the news and there's so much bad news. Obviously, the news is always going to lead with what's the most dramatic and often the most traumatic. But there's so much that's happening in the world every day that's good. There's so much happening in the world every day that's right. There's so much happening in the world every day that's true. And I think about, for example, I'm thinking about the people who are going to watch this online service, and I'm also anticipating the people who will be, sitting in the Joslyn Park Auditorium on Sunday for our in-person service. And, I'm thinking about the person that will be there who is taking his friend for cancer treatment. I'm thinking about the couple that is providing housing for members of their family. I'm thinking about the woman who is spending lots of quality time with her father as he recovers from a stroke. On and on I could go. All of the good, all of the right, all of the true. And this is what it looks like to walk in the light, to imitate or mimic God, who is light. But the word fruit is an interesting one. It tells us that we're not factories, we're gardens. In a factory, things are manufactured, and we can't manufacture all that is good. We can't manufacture all that is right. We can't manufacture all that is true. But what I cannot manufacture can be produced in my life as I walk in the light. So what is produced naturally is all that is good, right, and true. So what we do, man, the good, the right, the true, Paul is like, you are radiant. But also why we do it, like not just what we do or who we are and what we do, but why. Verse 10, finding out what is acceptable to the Lord. That phrase, acceptable to the Lord, the emphasis is on the Lord. Not necessarily what's acceptable to us or to those around us, but what is acceptable to the Lord. Now, what is that? And how do we find that out? It's interesting that as often as light is used as a metaphor in the Bible, it's most often used as a metaphor for the Bible. And no doubt one of the ways that we can find out what is acceptable or pleasing to the Lord is by reading the Bible. There in the written word of God, we discover what is acceptable, what is pleasing, but also the living word, which is a reference to Jesus. Remember, for a while there, it was kind of a fad to wear products that had the acronym WWJD on them, which stood for What Would Jesus Do? There were bracelets and there were t-shirts and there were bumper stickers, and anything that becomes that big of a fad is always gonna have some blowback. But the idea, the premise was a great one. It's an excellent question. Let's just think for a moment about Jesus' approval ratings in heaven. Like when Jesus was here on earth, did he get it or not? Well, we know that he got it. How do we know that he got it? Well, first of all, at his baptism, that voice spoke from heaven. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. So at that moment, God the Father was putting his stamp of approval on the private life of God the Son, of Jesus. And then at the end of his public ministry, at an event called the Transfiguration, once again, there was that same voice from heaven. And so once again, God was putting his stamp of approval, this time on Jesus' public life. Like perfect approval rating on his private life, perfect approval rating on his public life. So all we need to do to know what is acceptable and what is pleasing to God is to look at Jesus. We can ask ourselves in almost any situation, what would Jesus think about this? What would Jesus say about this? What would Jesus do about this if he were in my shoes? And of course, the reason that we ask those questions is because we love him. It's not because we have to approach life this way. It's because we want to. It's because we choose to. When you were a kid, did you ever have like a glow-in-the-dark toy? Maybe like a glow-in-the-dark ball that you got at the bottom of a box of cereal or something. And chances are pretty good that you made the same mistake that millions of other kids made. You pulled that glow-in-the-dark ball out of the box, and then you immediately ran to a dark place and were disappointed. Like, oh man, this thing doesn't work. Well, it doesn't glow in the dark by itself. You've got to take it and hold it under light. So we learned that if you held it under light and then took it into a dark place, that it would glow in the dark. And we learned that the longer we held it under the light, maybe even the closer to the light, the longer and brighter it would glow. And I think the same thing is true in our lives. It's something like that with God. I'm most like him when I'm closest to him. And I feel closest to him when I'm most like him. So who we are and what we do, but then why we do it to please him. Paul would look at us and say, this right here, you are radiant. So we're talking about that today. First, we talked about that idea that we are radiant. Now we want to talk about that idea that we are to irradiate. So look with me, beginning in verse 11, it says, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret. But all things that are exposed are made manifest by the light, for whatever makes manifest is light. Therefore he says, awake, you who sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. So in verse 11, we see a negative command followed by a positive command. The negative command is have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. So contrast that with the fruit of the Spirit or of light in verse 9, and then here the unfruitful works of darkness. So light versus dark, fruit versus not fruit. And so we're not to have any fellowship with what is dark, with what is not fruit. The word fellowship actually means to participate in something with someone, to have in common. And so the idea would be that whatever else we have in common with people who are living from that place, we don't want to have in common with them those unfruitful works of darkness. Well, then the positive command is, but rather expose them. Now, admittedly, that sounds critical, judgmental, narrow. And I want to be clear that that's not the place that we should be coming from. So what does it mean and how do we do this? Well, in John's gospel, not once but twice, Jesus is recorded as saying, I am the light of the world, which is huge because in rabbinic tradition, this phrase applied to Torah and temple. And then Jesus says this. But it's interesting also that in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, you are the light of the world. So which is it? Is he the light of the world, or are we the light of the world, or both? Like, what does this mean? How should we think about this? Well, what has helped me the most is to think in terms of the sun and the moon. The sun obviously is a source of light. The moon is not a source of light, at least not in the sense that there is any light at all that originates with the moon. When we look at the moon in the sky, as I'm sure you know, it is simply reflecting the light of the sun. That's what we see. We see the moon illuminated by the sun. And so it's like that with us and God. You know, he is the light source, and we are simply reflecting that light source. There's one time many years ago when my eldest daughter, Lauren, was, young, and she had called for me from her room. So I had gotten out of bed and walked from my room to her room to see what she needed, and I took care of her. And then I was on the way back to my room to get back in bed. And as I passed, out of one room, briefly through the hallway and then into the other room, I walked right into the door jamb. Bam! Just totally walked into it. And it was like, oh man, I think I yelled out, because it hurt. And that was one of those deals where I woke up the next morning and I had like a red mark on my head. I had smacked it so hard. It can be dangerous walking around your house at night in the dark. And so with that in mind, one of the things that I do as a husband and as a dad is to try to look out for those kinds of dangers. Before going to bed at night, I check to make sure the door is locked, but I also check to make sure that there's nothing that's like a tripping hazard. You can pretty much guess what routes your family members would have to take. If they get up during the night to go to the restroom or to go to the kitchen, what routes they're going to take. And so if there's something that's out of place, that's in their way, you want to deal with that before you turn the lights out. So here's what I would normally do. If I found something like that, something out of place, in the way, something that's a hazard, I'm either going to move it, mention it, or illuminate it. So by move it, I mean I'm going to literally pick it up and move it out of the way, set it someplace where no one's going to trip over it in the night. If there's some reason why I can't do that, then I'm going to mention it. I'm going to be like, okay, everybody, just a reminder, there's this item in this spot. So if you get up during the night, you're going to have to take a wide path around it. And then illuminate it. Well, if I can't move it, and if I'm concerned that maybe if I can't mention it, everyone's already asleep, or I am concerned that, they're going to forget, well, then sometimes you can even illuminate it. You can put a light on it. You can leave a light on that's in a hallway or in another room, sort of a thing, so that there's light on it. Well, I think we could sort of take those things and apply them to this idea here of, exposing, as it says, the unfruitful works of darkness. We can do some of these same things, but let's just develop this a little bit. So in the New English Bible, the end of verse 11 reads like this, but show them up for what they are. So, part of the problem is that the fruit of light, which as we learned is good and right and true, it is fruitful, but the works of darkness are unfruitful. They're unproductive. They're barren. They have no beneficial results. So what we're talking about here is not about condemning people, but we're simply talking about helping other people see the emptiness, the unfruitfulness, the unproductiveness, the barrenness of a particular way of being in this world. So in this case, I said I might move an item that was going to be in someone's way. Well, so how do we move obstacles with people? I think by doing something good. Like in Matthew 5, verse 16, when Jesus said what he did about letting our light so shine before men that they may see our good works and glorify our Father in heaven. We can do good things that actually remove obstacles in other people's lives. We can move things in that sense. But what about mentioning them? I said sometimes I'll mention an obstacle to family members. Well, in this case, mentioning them to people could mean that, yeah, there is a time to speak up and to speak out. I think about, how frequently in the Old Testament, the prophets spoke out against injustice and oppression. And there are things that we need to speak up about. And there are times when we need to speak out. But then also I talked about how I might illuminate something that's in the way. I might put light on it. And so too, we can do that. I had a neighbor some years ago and, he put Christmas lights up and had them on and enjoyed them. But when Christmas was over, I took my lights down. He didn't. His lights were still there in January. They were still there in February. They were still there in March and April and May and June. By the time it was, 6 months after Christmas, I'm like, well, don't take them down now. You might as well leave them up. And they did. They stayed up all the way through until the next holiday season. But then the weirdest thing happened. As if it wasn't weird enough that those lights stayed on his house all year long. When the holidays came around the next year, I thought, it was Thanksgiving. Right after Thanksgiving, I thought, they'll start turning the lights on. And didn't. It's December. They'll start turning the lights on. They didn't. It's like a week before Christmas. They'll start turning the lights on. They didn't. It's Christmas Eve. Maybe they're just waiting for Christmas Eve. Nope. No lights on Christmas Eve. After leaving the lights in the house all year long, they never turned the lights on the following holiday season. And they were home. I thought of that. They were home. Like, what in the world? If you leave your lights up all year, you are morally obligated to turn those lights on. Well, in a similar way, we've got to have the lights on. We've got to turn the lights on. We've got to let our light shine. And we don't want anything to obstruct that. If we are all about what is good and what is right and what is true, the light that's going to cast, the way that's going to irradiate the spaces that we're in and the people that we're close to is going to be so impactful. We can't let anything get in the way of that. But that's why Paul had the negative command before the positive one. Going back to this idea that we're like the moon, in that we reflect God's light, just like the moon reflects the light of the sun. Well, there are times that you go outside and it's a full moon, right? And then there are times you go out and it's like a 3/4 moon, and then times that it's a half moon. There's times that it's just a little sliver. But then, and here's what I want to focus on for a moment, then there is the lunar eclipse. And that is when the earth gets between the sun and the moon, and it interrupts the light from the sun that would shine on the moon. And so the moon disappears. You don't see the moon. And that's what happens in our lives. Just like the earth gets in the way of the sun's light, the world, this old way of being, not this that we are now, but that we were, that can get in the way, and that can obstruct. That could obstruct that light. In verse 12, he says it's shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret. It's funny because, sometimes people just say way more than they need to say about things, even things in their own lives, much less the lives of other people. I've been in situations where people give graphic descriptions of their struggles. And to put a finger on something serious for just a moment, I think sometimes there's some kind of gratification for them in that's not appropriate at all. But sometimes when someone's telling their testimony, they'll spend 99% of their time on, all the stuff they used to do, and then just a real quick little ending. And sometimes it's too much information, or sometimes when people are sharing prayer requests, whether it's about them or someone else, like like the graphic detail that's being shared, totally unnecessary. Like, all you gotta say is pray for my friend, he's struggling, instead of like a blow by blow account. Sometimes you're like, my ears. You can't unhear this stuff. Oh man, TMI, too much information, and it is overshare. Overshare. But, part of what Paul's saying is here is, like, we don't need to do that. We don't need to get into that. Like, he's saying to his readers, you can understand what I'm saying without us having to get into that level of detail. But this idea of things done in secret, it just reminds me that we do all have secrets. And, we tend to think that things done in secret will never be known. And the truth is, we can hide from other people, and we can and do often hide from ourselves, but we can't hide from God. And on a serious note, it is a sobering thing to think about one's life review, to think about that time when there will be an account. So glad for God's forgiveness, aren't you? But verse 13, all things that are exposed are made manifest by the light, for whatever makes manifest is light. There's a lot I could say about this, but in these, last few minutes that we have, Paul has gone from talking about radiating, how we are radiant, to talking about how we are to irradiate. And so I'm just thinking about that old Chinese proverb that is variously attributed, but it goes like this: it's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. You've heard it before, right? It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. Some of us are so busy cursing the darkness that we've never lit a candle. And that's part of my concern. When we come to this part about exposing the unfruitful works of darkness, sadly, so many have taken this to mean that we should condemn people, that we should make judgments about people, and that we should, tell people what's up, kind of a thing. And it's really, I don't think, the spirit at all of what Paul is saying. We complain about coworkers and neighbors and family members, but have we lit a candle? Have we lit a candle? Remember, we were talking earlier about those of us who have never been able to be kind to 13 versions of us ago, 10 versions of us ago, 5 versions of us ago. We've never been able to be tender to that us. We've never been able to forgive that us. And you know what I think when I see someone who is particularly hard on other people? I see someone who's never really done the work that we talked about in that first point. I see someone who's never really been able to reconcile who they were with who they are. They've never quite figured out where to file, the that as opposed to the this. And, they punish themselves and they punish everybody else. So part of the beauty is that what we're really talking about here is not about condemning people or making judgments about them or telling them what's up. What we're talking about here is having done the work that we talked about before, where we've been forgiven and where we own the past, but we've made peace with it. And because God has been kind to us, and because he has been tender, and because he has forgiven us, we're able to be kind and tender and forgiving to those versions of us. And from that place, the Bible teaches that forgiving people forgive, that forgiven people, that is, forgive. Forgiven people forgive. That's what they do. And so we then are able to be kind and tender and forgiving to people as we help them see that perhaps this way of living that they're stuck in isn't serving them, isn't going to get them where they want to go, isn't what God created them for. So what a beautiful thing it is when because we've made peace with the past, we can now help others do the same. We can help others come to faith and receive forgiveness and learn to think about their journey in a new and different way. And instead of reminding them forever about their past, empower them to think about and focus on and move forward into their future. Verse 14, therefore he says, awake you who sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. That is not a quotation of any specific Old Testament verse. It could be sort of a summary of something like Isaiah 61 verse 1. Some commentators even think that it might have been a lyric from an Easter hymn or a baptismal hymn. So that's kind of a cool thing. But this whole idea of waking from sleep, we've joked about it before, but for some reason, people hate to admit that they were asleep. Kids are so like that. If you're a parent, a grandparent, you've been driving and you've got your son or daughter or your grandchild in the back seat, they're sound asleep. But when you get home with them and wake them up, you might say something like, boy, you really conked out back there. And they're like, I didn't sleep. Like, why don't they want to admit they slept? I didn't fall asleep. Really? Because you were like snoring the whole way. Nope, I didn't fall asleep. Yeah, because you had like drool running down your chin for most of the drive. Nope, I wasn't asleep. Really? Because like you've still got the impression of the doorknob on your cheek from where your head came to rest. And it is the same way as adults. Maybe you've heard me tell the story, but one time as a young adult, I woke up on the phone. Like when I came to, I'm holding the phone and the other person is speaking. I don't know who I'm speaking to. I don't know what we're talking about. It was the craziest thing, but we hate to admit that we were asleep. But some of us have been asleep spiritually. As believers, as followers of Jesus, as people of faith, we need to wake up to who we are, to what we do, to why we do it. We need to wake up to the idea that we are radiant. We need to wake up to our responsibility to irradiate the spaces and the people around us. Remember, I said in the beginning that the word light is used 5 times. Well, it's the same word each time until the last time. It's a different word the last time. And that last word is a word that's used to describe the sunrise. So the picture I would love for you to have is that of waking up to a new day. Waking up to a new day. I hope there's some takeaway for you in this message, that it can feel like a new day for you, that you can realize that that was that and this is this, and you are radiant. Father, thank you for this passage. I pray that it could encourage us. I pray that it could inspire us. I pray that, it would be our desire to walk in the Spirit, to walk in the light, to see the fruit of that in our lives, all that is good, all that is right, all that is true, that bringing that kind of a life, bringing that way of being into the spaces in which you've placed us, to the people that you've put around us, that it would be transformative, that it would change our environments, but that it would also change the lives of other people to your glory. In the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
And now it's time to fill out a Connect card.
Yeah, that's your way of letting us know that you attended online and requesting information about our virtual small groups. Just go to our homepage, solachurch.life, scroll to the bottom of the page. That's where the Connect card lives.
And don't forget to follow Sola Church on social media.
Yeah, we're on all your favorite platforms. We're on Instagram, and Facebook, and TikTok, and Twitter, and YouTube. So it's at Sola Church LA on all of those platforms.
And we hope you have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time at Sola Church Online.
Bye, everybody.